as a hotbed of Marxism in Japan since the beginning of 20th century. Professor Hideto Akashi graduated from Hitotsubashi University in 1993 and then received his PhD in sociology from the same Hitotsubashi University 11 years ago, 2010. Professor is the author of co-author or co-translator of 10 academic books dealing with Das Kapital, generally Marxism, and generally Western philosophy with special focus on Marxist philosophy. He also wrote several dozens of academic papers in Japanese and English dealing with such topics as Marxist thought in general, specifically economic thought in Das Kapital, profit rate, and the relationship between the logic of Das Kapital to the contemporary capitalism. So today we are going to listen to a fascinating presentation about one of the key points in Marxist understanding of socioeconomics, that is the tendency of the rates of profit to fall and its interrelationship with the dynamics in the general amount of profit and also situation with unemployment, generally market and society. It's very topical given the current developments of world capitalism, since we are living now through a recession, partly triggered by the pandemic. It's extremely topical. So we are going to learn a lot. I would suggest that we will have the presentation of around 40 minutes, which will leave us around 18 minutes for questions and answers. So I will give now the floor to Professor Hideto Akashi. Please, would you be so kind to begin? Would you share the screen?
Yep.
Very
Thank
good.
you for introducing me very kindly. I'm very honored to speak at SSK online talk. I'm now investigating the manuscript of Capital in Mega second section, fourth band, especially second and third book. And I want to show my PowerPoint. Can you see?
Yeah,
Okay,
excellent, excellent. Yeah.
thank you. Just a minute. Okay. Today, I would like to talk about the law of the tendential fall in the rate of profit. This is a controversial topics, as you know, and I want to talk about it from the viewpoint of ecological crisis and the turnover, just a little bit. First, I would like to summarize this law according to my understanding. After that, I mention Mr. Michael Heinrich's critique against this law. And then let's look at the details of this law as following. And I want to emphasize the waste in society as a whole in the context of this law. This will lead to periodical crisis. And I want to analyze how digital and green technology affects the rate of profit and how turnover of capital affects the rate of profit. After that, if we have time, I want to introduce Marx simulation in 1867-68 to you. Okay, let's look at the essence of the law. The social productive power of labor is increasing and the organic composition of capital, C, concept of capital, over V variable capital is rising in society as a whole. The price of individual commodity is decreasing and the quantity of produced commodities is rapidly increasing. The fall of the rate of profit and the increase of the quantity of profit proceed at the same time. These aspects are mediated by each capital seeking extra profit and striving to survive competition. The minimum size of an individual capital increases. Small capitals are concentrated into a few big capitals or constitute excess capital directed towards speculation, etc. The same factors as those listed in the previous slide also generate some counteracting factors against the tendential fall of rate of profit. For example, economy of constant capital, the increase of relative surplus value, etc. But counteracting factors cannot diminish the main factor itself. This law shows that capitalism necessarily brings about periodical crises as violent solutions for existing contradictions. Let's look at Heinrich's critique just briefly. Please look at this formula. P profit rate equal S surplus value over C plus V. And both numerator and denominator are divided by V. The result is right side. And according to Heinrich, we cannot determine which is growing faster between numerator S over V or denominator C over V plus 1. That's why Heinrich doesn't accept this law as a scientific one. He said, if Marx initially assumes the numerator S over V remains constant while the denominator C plus V plus 1 grows because C over V grows, then it is clear that the value of the entire fraction falls. However, the numerator does not remain constant because of the increase of relative surplus value. And he said, the increase in C occurring precisely in the course of the production of relative surplus value, which leads to an increasing rate of surplus value. According to Heinrich, an increasing organic composition as such is not enough to prove a falling rate of profit. By contrast, Fred Mosley emphasizes that the increase of S over V is more limited than that of C over V in order to defend this law, the law of tendential fall of profit rate. Mosley quoted, two workers working for 12 hours a day could not supply the same surplus value as 24 workers, each working for only 2 hours, even if they were able to live on air. This sentence was written by Engels, and Marx's sentence is a little different from this sentence. Marx didn't write this part, working for 12 hours a day. This part was added by Engels in Mebel, Marx Engels, Berke, Engels version. The Heinrich shows the pattern through which both the organic composition and the rate of profit increase by using his simulation based on the above example in Marx Engels Berke. The example was written by Engels. However, in his simulation, The quantity of surplus value and the total value of commodities are decreasing as productivity of labor increases. I think it is a little strange because surplus value and the total value are decreasing. At least Heinrich should multiply the number of C, V, and S. But if he will do so, the proportion between 24 workers and 2 workers must change. If you are interested in Heinrich's simulation, please see the end of this PowerPoint. You can see details of his simulation there. And in my opinion, the most important thing is that the fall of the rate of profit and the increase of the quantity of profit proceed at the same time during the accumulation of capital. As far as I know, many scholars didn't pay attention to this factor. And Heinrich thinks that Marx doubted his own law of the rate of profit in 1870s. I want to show you another possibility about Marx's investigation in 1870s. I want to quote important part from his manuscript. The same development in the social productivity of labor is expressed as the capitalist mode of production advances in 2 ways. On the one hand, in a progressive tendency for the rate of profit to fall, and on the other hand, in a constant growth in the absolute mass of the surplus value. So that a relative decline in the variable capital corresponds to an absolute increase in surplus value. This twofold effect can be expressed only by a growth in the total capital that takes place more rapidly than the fall in the rate of profit. This means the scale of the total advanced capital is increasing. Each capitalist strives to make the price of individual commodity cheaper in order to survive competition with other capitalists. This means that each capital applies new methods of production to lower the cost price. Marx said, the capitalist who applies the improved mode of production sells below the market price, but above his own individual production price until competition has balanced this out. This means the extra profit would be gained before the generalization of the new standard of production. Marx said, as the profit rate falls, the capital minimum grows, and the growing minimum amount of capital needed as productivity increases appears in the following way. As soon as a new invention has been introduced generally, smaller capitals are in future excluded from his line of business. This means concentration. And only when a mechanical invention in the various spheres of production are in their infancy can they be operated by smaller capitals. This part reminds me of digital industry in, for example, 1990s. Counteracting factors. Marx showed us 6 counteracting factors. He said, counteracting influences must be at work, checking and delaying the effect of the general law and giving it simply the character of a tendency, which is why we have described the fall in the general rate of profit as a tendential fall. And he showed six factors. Number one, a more intense exploitation of labor. Second, a reduction of wages below their value. Michael Heinrich pointed out Marx didn't deal with the increase of relative surplus value here. This is true. But number three, economy and the use of constant capital. The value of the constant capital does not increase in the same proportion as its material volume. This means economy of scale or scale merit. And, and depreciation of the existing capital thus goes hand in hand with the development of industry. This factor has a connection with the increase of relative surplus value. Number four, the relative surplus population, which is inseparable from and accelerated by the development of labor productivity. Number five, foreign trade cheapens the elements of constant capital, the necessary means of subsistence. This means foreign trade can reduce the production cost. Number six is a little complicated. He said, as capitalist production advances hand in hand with an accelerated amount of accumulation, one portion of capital is considered simply to be interest-bearing capital and is invested as such. Marx means, for example, railways industry. Railways industry is excluded from equalization of general rate of profit. I will mention this factor later again. However, Marx could not enough deal with the effect of turnover on the fall in the profit rate in his manuscripts of Capital before 1867. Regarding this point, I agree with Fred Mosley. I want to emphasize this factor, the effect of turnover on the profit rate. And waste in society as a whole. Since capitalists must focus on the production and appropriation surplus value as their absolute purpose, they are unable to regulate the full system of social production. I think this is one of the most fundamental contradictions of capitalism. And this will necessarily lead to the periodical crisis. Under a variety of legal environmental regulations, etc., and in the face of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, each capital seeks to economize on constant capital and to make progress in the recycling and reduction of waste, etc., as much as possible. But due to the principle of profit, capitalists cannot adopt recycling systems, etc. If to do so will obstruct the accumulation of capital. Even if individual capitals improve recycling systems, etc., viewed from the overall standpoint of society, the compulsion generated by competition among capitalists cause overproduction and social waste in a variety of forms, according to Capital Volume 1. For example, Out-of-date machines may become industrial waste without being recycled because they must be replaced quickly. Regarding CO2 emissions of automobiles, increased energy efficiency of individual cars cannot keep pace with increasing the quantity of cars sold on the market, according to Brand and Bissen, German scholars. They said the resulting energy savings, however, will be entirely negated by the growth of the total number of cars. Marx said, periodically, however, too much is produced in the way of means of labor and means of subsistence, too much for them to be able to function as means for exploiting the workers at a specific rate of profit. Too many commodities are produced for the value and the surplus value contained in them to be valorized. This means the waste in society as a whole, huge waste, or we can say disproportion of social production. And Marx said, it is impossible to carry out this process without constantly repeated explosion. Repeated explosion means, of course, a crisis. This means not only economic crisis, but also ecological crisis. In my opinion, the ecological crisis proceeds regardless of the realization of value and surplus value. Regarding crisis, Marx said as follows. Part of the commodities on the market can complete their process of circulation and reproduction only by an immense reduction in their prices, a depreciation of the capital they represent. The value of fixed capital suffers more or less the same depreciation. This process is thrown into stagnation and confusion by the general fall in prices. This disturbance and stagnation is made more acute by the development of money as a means of payment or credit system. And the false things leads to severe crisis, sudden losses of value, actual stagnation, and disruption in the production process, etc. But this process will restore the profit rate and the new cycle of business cycle or industrial cycle will begin. And I want to analyze how digital and green technology affect the rate of profit. Brandt and Bissen said the information age since the 1990s has seemed to provide a dematerialized or virtual economy. But such an economy still requires material resources that must be extracted. Digital technology may reduce the cost of transportation, etc., but it will be faced with the deficiency of rare earth metals. The rare earth metals are often obtained under highly hazardous conditions that threaten the health of workers and the natural environment, especially in China and Africa. The price of such material resources will increase. Digital industry has a difficulty of scrapping and recycling. The recycling of digital devices is expensive and therefore does not advance sufficiently. For example, tech giants Apple has a big project of perfect recycling, but it doesn't seem to succeed in doing so. Marx said these railways do not therefore enter into the equalization of the general rate of profit, since they yield a profit rate less than the average. If they did enter into this process, the average rate would fall much lower. Theoretically speaking, it is possible to include them, railways, and we should then obtain a profit rate lower than that which seemingly exists, because the proportion of constant capital to variable is at its greatest in railways industry. Uh, According to Professor Konishi, Japanese scholar, this is also the case with AI, EV, electric vehicles, and self-driving cars, or 5G networks, and so on. In my opinion, these branches are now included into the equalization of the general rate of profit because the business form of joint stock has been generalized. That means the tendential fall of the general rate of profit. Extra profit would disappear much earlier than before because digital technology is rapidly improving and quickly making a new standard universal. The organic composition of capital must rise due to digital technology, although it may reduce some typical fixed capital components, for example, uh, warehouse, buildings, etc. This also leads to the tendential fall of profit rate. However, wages will sink due to the increase of relative surplus population, and tech companies formulate the so-called fabless strategy. These factors make the profit rate higher in the short term because they help raise S over V, the rate of surplus value. This can function as a counteracting factor. Let's see how turnover of capital affects the rate of profit. In chapter 1 of the main manuscript for volume 3 of Capital, Marx wrote only the title about the influence of changes in circulation time on the rate of profit. In the second manuscript for volume 2 of Capital, the effect of turnover on the elasticity of capital's function is mentioned. This manuscript was written in 1868 and 1870. But of course, it is applicable to the law of tendential fall in the rate of profit as one counteracting factor. If capital has a quick turnover, the rate of profit will be increasing. But under the ecological crisis, for example, many transportation services will be restricted and become expensive, which would obstruct the turnover of capital, for example, under the climate change. When we analyze the effect of turnover on the profit rate, it is important to distinguish the proportion among value components, C and V, of the annual cost price of the produced commodities, or value components of cost price of individual commodity from that of total advanced capital. The value proportion of total commodities or individual commodities this is different from value components of total advanced capital. This is because there is fixed capital that does not enter into the cost price of the commodity. In value components, we saw part of C. This C is including fixed capital and circulating constant capital. And they turn over differently from each other. And Marx said, when one looks only at the prices of the individual commodities in themselves, or when one merely measures the labor in respect of the quantity of the commodities produced by it, the investigation always goes astray. Everything depends on the magnitude of the total capital laid out. This sentence is quite important. I think so. Marx said, the rate of profit, if calculated simply on the price elements of the individual commodity, that means the rate of profit per unit. The rate of profit per unit would be expressed higher than it is in reality. And that's why we must not start from the profit rate per unit in order to discuss this law. For in the individual commodity, the constant capital figures only from the point of view of its wear and tear. He said, the greater the increase in fixed capital resulting from the increase in the productivity of labor, the greater the portion of the capital that has not been consumed, or the longer the turnover period during which the reproduction process of this portion of the constant capital runs its course. Although the fixed capital becomes greater, its turnover time must be shortened as much as possible in the current competition among capitalists. Even if the depreciation of machinery becomes slower, each capital needs to replace it with new machinery before it would be outdated. It is related to moral depreciation. In the main manuscript for volume 3 of Capital, Marx did not enough mention the possibility that circulating capital turns over more than once per year, for example, 2 times or 3 times per year, in contrast to the fixed capital's annual turnover as wear and tear. In the main manuscript, this manuscript was written in 1964 and 65. Marx implies 2 types of the rate of profit. If surplus value of 200 is calculated on the total cost price of 1,000, the rate of profit is 20%. But if it is calculated on the total advanced capital of 2,000, the rate of profit is 10%. This is simple simulation. He said, in our investigations into the rate of profit, we have left out of consideration the unconsumed part of the fixed capital in order not to complicate matters. In the 1867-68 manuscripts, he investigated 2 types from the viewpoint of the turnover of capital. These manuscripts were published for the first time in Mega 243. Marx distinguished 2 types of the rate of profit as P on the total advanced capital and as pi on the cost price. Two types of the rate of profit will be basically different, but they can be equal in the specific case. And I want to show Marx simulation at that time, but this calculation is a little complicated. Please check it later. But, I will explain just briefly. The advanced capital 500 is composed as follows. C equal 500. And 400 fixed constant capital plus 78 plus 6 over 23 circulating constant capital plus 21 plus 17 over 23 variable capital. And this part, 78, 6 over 23 plus 21 plus 17 over 23, the sum is 100. And this circulating capital turns over, for example, 4 times, 5 times per year. The rate of surplus value 100%. But the fixed capital of 400 turns over once in 10 years. That means it turns over only 40 a year. The working year equal 50 weeks for the sake of simplification. This calculation is a little complicated, but if the circulating capital 100 turns over 23 over 5 times per year, it would lead to recovery of the total advanced capital, since only 1/10 of the fixed capital turns over once per year. 100 to circulating constant capital turns over 23 over 5 times, and fixed capital turns over only 40 per year. That's why 460 plus 40 equal 500. This is the recovery of the total advanced capital. This is a specific case. In this case, P, surplus value over C, total advanced capital, equal 20%. Pi, surplus value over annual cost price, equal 20%. Two kind of profit rates are equal in this specific case. But in my view, we can regard this case as a kind of social average of organic composition and turnover. Then we should pay attention to the factors as follows. Capitalists do not know the difference between P and pi is brought about by the turnover and the organic composition of the advanced capital. Their understanding about the rate of profit is quite confused. They are bound by the fetish-like form of capital. All parts of their capital look as if they generated profit. For example, Malthus, English scholar in 19th century, thought that all part of capital generate profit. Marx criticized Malthus. If P is much lower than pi because of the large proportion of the fixed capital in society as a whole, the tendential fall of the general rate of profit will proceed more sharply than before. This is the details of Marx simulation at that time. Please check it later. Conclusion. The most important factor of this law is that the rate of profit falls and the quantity of profit increases at the same time. This factor generates some counteracting factors, but the latter cannot diminish the former. Even in the age of digital technology and ecological crisis, this law is significant for crisis theory because it represents the essential contradiction of capitalism. In his 1867-68 manuscripts, Marx tried to integrate the effect of turnover into his argument of the rate of profit. This viewpoint is a little different from Michael Heinrich. After the publication of Capital, in my opinion, Marx did not abandon this law, but he wanted to elaborate this law by including the effect of turnover. However, Marx could not accomplish this elaboration in the end. That's all from me. Thank you for listening.
Yes. Thank you very much for extremely interesting presentation. It was really fascinating, and deep thanks for keeping your time. You were very, very exact in keeping your time, exactly 40 minutes. I appreciate it very much. So we have learned now a lot about the current discussions over the tendency, supposed law about the tendency of the rates of profit to fall, and about the ecological repercussions, ecological consequences of the waste production under capitalism, under the conditions of competition. So I have lots of questions myself, but before that, I would like to inquire if there are any questions among the audience. Anybody would like to ask a question? I'm trying now to check if there are any hands raised. You can either raise your hand or send a message in chat indicating that you would like to ask a question. Sonjin, would you like to comment? I guess you have to be unmuted. Can you unmute Sonjin? Yes.
Actually, I wrote my questions in the chat room. So, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, here it is.
Would like to read. Or Professor Tikhonov, you may read the chat. May I read? Okay.
Yes, please, please.
So, great talk, Professor Akashi. Yes, your presentation, yes, it's a really great talk. Your presentation clearly shows that Marx's law of tendency of rate of profit to fall is useful in explaining the current ecological crisis. And your discussion of the effects of digital revolution or turnover time on the rate of profit is also very interesting. I have two questions. The first question, what is your opinion on Michael Heinrich's assertion that Marx doubted the law of tendency of rate of profit to fall in his later years, the 1870s? Today's talk, Professor Akashi, you talked about the manuscript of Marx in 1868, not his text after 1870s. So is there any text in the Mega 2 which shows that Marx explicitly upholds the law of the tendency of rate of profit to fall in his 1870s? Is my first question. And second, can we assume that the economic crisis resulted from the law of tendency of rate of profits to fall functions to counteract the ecological crisis. That's it.
Yes, so Professor Akashi, would you be so kind to answer around 5 minutes maybe?
Okay. Thank you for your interesting question. And number one, I think Michael Heinrich's assertion is not right, to be honest. And yes, I dealt with his manuscript, Marx's manuscript in 1868. Yeah, exactly in 1870s. Marx didn't mention the law of tendential fall in the rate of profit, but during 1870s, he tried to integrate the turnover, the effect of turnover on this law. This is my understanding. Yes, as Heinrich said, Marx didn't mention this law in 1870s, but I think Marx tried to analyze how turnover affects on this law. This is my opinion. And number two, yeah, this question is very important and very difficult. Economic crisis maybe function. The economic crisis may function to counteract the ecological crisis. Corona pandemic may function to counteract the ecological crisis because the aviation service is strongly restricted, and the CO2 emission will be reducing just a little. I don't not yet analyze, but I think capitalism cannot overcome this ecological crisis, or maybe capitalism cannot overcome corona pandemic. This is my assumption. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much for your answer, and again for precisely keeping the time. So I wonder if there are any other questions. I'm trying to check. Yes, Kuhyong, please. Please, I saw your hand. Yes.
Hello, Professor Akashi. I am Guyeon Jung. I appreciate your helpful presentation, and I have one question. In page 28, you distinguish two kinds of profit rate. One is the rate of profit to advanced capital, and the other is the rate of profit to cost price. You said that when these two profit rates are equal, the composition of capital and the rate of turnover in this case can be regarded as the social average. How and why we can call this the social average? What is the meaning of the social average of the organic composition and turnover? That is my question.
Thank you very much. So, Professor Akashi, if you again could answer in less than 5 minutes, that would be nice. I hope there would be more questions.
Thank you for your question. Yes, this simulation is very difficult to understand. The social average of organic composition and turnover. This is a simple simulation developed by Marx. How can I say? For example, Marx wrote one letter to Engels. He asked Engels which proportion you think between fixed capital and circulating constant capital? The Engels answered 4 to 1. 4 is fixed capital and 1 is circulating constant capital. This means the social average of proportion between fixed capital and circulating constant capital. This is very rough calculation, but I think this calculation can function in order to analyze the social average of organic composition and turnover according to image or representation of capitalists. 4 to 1 proportion between fixed capital and circulating constant capital is quite normal in order to think about the recovery of their investment. Could I answer your question?
Kuhyun, was it the answer you expected, or is your question answered?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So, and then I wonder if there are more questions. I'm pretty sure there should be some. Anybody with questions, please raise your hand or write in the chat. I'm searching now for raised hands. Okay, no raised hands. Sang-won, please. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Hide, it's very nice to see you again.
Yeah.
And it's very nice to see you very healthy. And it was a great talk, and I want to raise one question. I guess Michael Heinrich was against the tendential fall of rate, profit rate, not only from the reason of philological, not only because of the textual analysis, but also because there are political reasons. So, such as the dangerousness of the dangerousness of the errors of Second International, so collapse theory. So then we don't have to make revolution when the profit rate falls. Then we should just wait for the collapse of the capitalism. So it's a kind of determinism, and so Heinrich was also against this kind of political attitude. So how then, my question is, how do you think of this kind of political passiveness of the which can be derived from Second International's collapse theory? So yes, that's my question.
Thank you for your question. Yes. When I was in Germany with you, we participated in his lecture together at the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung. Yes. Regarding criticizing collapse theory, I agree with Michael Heinrich. Absolutely, he's right. But he thinks Marx abandoned this law in 1870s. It's a little strange. And I emphasize Marx thought about the crisis in the context of industrial cycle, business cycle, and he pointed out the crisis is one stage of industrial cycle, and Marx did not mention the collapse theory. Yes, this is correct. But I don't know why Michael Heinrich thinks that this law is not the scientific one in order to criticize collapse theory. I think his argument between criticizing collapse theory and criticizing the law of tendential fall it's not well connected. Sorry, this is my answer, but I have to think further.
Thank you very much. And now I'm going through the icons, searching for any hands raised. Any other questions? Or please, otherwise, just write in the chat if you would like to ask a question. I cannot see any more hands so far. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, then I have a very brief question. Probably it will be the last one since we have only 2 minutes left. So my question is, you mentioned business cycle, and I'm just curious. I'm not an economist, I'm just a historian. So I'm just curious, how do you think? Do we still live in the business cycle that started after the end of the World War II? In which case it will be a very long, protracted Kondratiev wave, and we will be living in the very end of its B phase. Or may we assume that a new business cycle started somewhere after the crash of the 1987, somewhere in the 1990s, when introduction of internet and advanced data technology seemingly somewhat improved the rates of profit at some point, and then it started to fall down. We had the depression in 2008. Would you divide the post-war period into 2 business cycles, or was it just one?
Thank you for your question. Yeah, it's a very difficult problem. Marx thought a 10 years cycle, and it's very important. For example, Lehman shock happened in 2008 or 9.
Right.
And, we are now in 2021, and we are facing corona crisis, and I'm sure that the big crisis will come, and regardless of corona pandemic. I want to say, I also think 10 years cycle is very important, and I agree with Marx, and 2008 or 9 Lehman shock, and 1997 Asian financial crisis, and Black Monday was in 1986.
1987. The Black
1987.
Monday, the great Wall Street crash, yes.
And oil shock was 1973, and so on.
Right.
Almost 10 years circle we can see.
Okay, so you concentrate on medium term, approximately 10 years cycles.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the possibility of conceptualizing longer cycles, up to 70, sort of 60, 70 years, but that's probably too speculative. Okay, thank you very much for your answer.
Wait a minute.
Uh-huh.
Vladimir, Marcel has a question. So.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Hello. I wanted to add something. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, certainly, yes.
I wanted just to add something on the question that Sangwon raised. Simply, there seems to me a sort of a short circuit in Heinrich's argument, and not only in his argument, because he's just reflecting. I think he's reflecting the thing that he's criticizing. Because even if we assume that there is a kind of determinism in the law of the rate of profit to fall, and if that implies collapse, which is a big if, but even if we assume that, that is a different question from revolution, because the question of revolution addresses the question what happens in and after the collapse. Right? So because the collapse can be followed by simply a new system of exploitation and domination. It can be followed by something more resembling whatever, feudal order or some kind of fascist non-capitalist order. Maybe that's possible, and so on. So the question of revolution is not affected by the question whether there is a determinacy in the rate of profit to fall and in the necessity that capitalism will end, which seems to me an obvious assumption to make anyway. The law of the rate of profit to fall addresses only the question how capitalism ends. Every mode of production ends at some point, and it is followed by something else. And what that something else is, that is the question that is at the heart of the question of revolution. So these are simply different matters.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess it was a comment. Professor Akashi, would you like to respond to this comment?
Yes. Thank you for your difficult question. And what should I say? Marx changed his attitude about the relationship between crisis and revolution. In 1848, he expected the revolution would come soon after the economic crisis, but it was false. The revolution, not 1848, but 1857. In 1857, Marx expected the revolution would come, but it was false. And after that, he investigated the relationship between crisis and revolution, and he analyzed the business cycle and the role of credit system and so on. Michael Heinrich paid attention to this factor. Marx changed his academic attitude, especially about credit system. Regarding this point, Michael Heinrich is correct that I think crisis has a lot of factors and a lot of causes. not only the law of tendential fall of rate of profit, but also many other factors function in order to generate crisis. This law is only one factor, but a very important factor. We must analyze many factors, and revolutionary movement has a lot of accidental elements, political or cultural, traditional. So many factors we must pay attention to, and there are a lot of accidental factors.
Okay,
Sorry,
thank you.
sorry, it's very difficult to answer.
Thank you very much. And we have two more people with questions. First, in the order of questions being received, it was Sonmi A. The question was, there were two questions here. First question was about your PPT slide number 19. And Mia-son would like you to explain more about digital and green technology. So you mentioned that's what Marx said, those railways don't therefore enter into the equalization of the general rate of profit, since they yield a profit rate less than the average. If they did enter into the process, the average rate would fall much lower. So that was the first question, if you could explain how it would relate to digital or green technology. And then there was one more question.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, we have a lot of things to discuss digital and green technology. And I only dealt with some elements. Yeah, the digital technology can reduce the labor power, for example, and the number of surplus population will be increasing. And I want to criticize Green New Deal because capitalism will not be able to overcome this crisis because capitalism is always producing the huge waste in society as a whole, as I have already explained. And digital and green technology needs huge investment for the fixed capital. That will lead to the fall of the rate of profit. This is my answer. Sorry, my answer is very simple.
And there was a second question by the same person. I couldn't understand. I think you typed it not fully. Dear Sonmi A, may you tell yourself what is your second question is? Can you unmute?
Yeah, yes. my mic is now open. I understand the digital and the green technology. It reduces the workers, the number of workers or working power, and it increases profit. But my question is, in the PPT 19, you said that this green technology and digital technology did not enter the equalization of general rate of profit. Therefore, you think that it can be reduced the falling of profit rate. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Why? I don't know. Why do you think that? Yeah.
Digital technology and green technology also have counteracting factors, but I think the rate of profit, the general rate of profit will fall because of increase of organic composition of capital, because digital technology digital technology have to investment for the huge fixed capital, especially for 5G networks, electric vehicles.
Yeah.
This
So-
investigation, this investment is much larger than
I see.
counteracting factor.
Yeah, I understand. You mean this digital and green technology can be a counter factor of the falling profit rate? I understand. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You had a second question?
Yeah.
So,
My second question is, what is it? Yeah, I think you said that Marx didn't consider about the turnover rate to counterfactor as a to counterfactor to the falling of profit rate. But I think I don't know, but my humble opinion is that Marx consider about turnover rate, but he might think that turnover rate is less effect than the falling of profit rate. I think it's my opinion. The how do you think about that? The falling of profit rate, there is an error. Sorry, my question is the turnover rate might less effect to the falling of turnover falling of profit rate.
Thank you for your question.
Yeah.
I want to discuss the effect of turnover on profit rate. And in order to analyze profit rate, we must consider the organic composition of capital and the speed of turnover.
Yeah.
If capital turns over very quickly, it means the increase of rate of profit.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know.
Factors.
Yeah.
We must think about two factors in relation.
What does it mean? Organic. What is it? Please say again.
Organic composition means
Composition?
The proportion between constant capital and variable capital. If productivity of labor increases, that means C over V is increasing because labor power is decreasing. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now, if the question now is solved, so then we should move to the last question, I guess. We are exceeding now our time now. So,
Thank you.
That was a question from So.
Yes, right.
Unfortunately, yes. Can you ask it yourself? Please.
Yes. Thank you for your presentation, yes, Professor Akashi, and I agree with that your opinion. But after your presentation, I also concerned about this problem. Yes. For example, yes, this one. Yes, we can also find two aspects, and social and analytic case character. Yes. If your presentation is correct, yes, we can also find this problem. Yes. Number one, and criticism of capital using the elasticity of nature, and after then, increasing interest in ecology and practicing its recovery in the entire society. At the result, recovery of the natural environment. But in the other hand, capital aspect, number one, recovery of the natural environment, it also means increasing the natural elements available to capital. And after then, recovery of the rate of profit by capital, at the result, expanding the influence of capital on society. So it is my conclusion, yes, the social interest in ecology for stable reproduction of society and the practice of its recovery will reversely restore the profit rate of capital, which will result in the expansion of capital-induced influences in society. So I think it is also our contradictions, yes. How can we resolve this contradiction?
It's a huge question about the ecological possible adverse consequences of our ecological concerns in advanced capitalist society. So it's a huge question, but if Professor Akashi could just offer a brief answer, I guess that we're a bit behind our time.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand which contradiction you mentioned.
Yes, yes, the contradiction, yes, these contradictions is mean that, yes, if we help people to recover the ecological crisis, and it also means it also will give a chance to capital to increase their profit rate. Because yes, if the environmental system would be recovered, and it also means to increase many elements of in the nature.
Sorry. 日本語でお願いします。
すみません。ごめんなさい。ちょっと日本語使います。はい。環境が良くなったら、結局自然の中で使える材料が多くなるので、それをもって資本がまた、徴用価値を得る手段が多くなるんじゃないんですか。だから我々が、環境保護を大事にするっていうことが逆に資本側にとっては、徴用価値率を、上げる、意味になる。これをどう解決するかっていうことですね。それが私は矛盾だと思います。以上です。はい。でしょう。
So, well, it's a huge issue, I guess. So, if you can just offer your opinion briefly.
Yeah, I understood his question. Yeah, but what should I say? It's very difficult. But what I can say is that we must stop capital's movement, and otherwise our Earth will collapse. That's all. Sorry, I can't answer now.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Well, so certainly you probably need a monograph to answer a question on this scale. So, Professor Akashi, thank you very much for extremely interesting lecture and for your succinct and meaningful answers to number of questions which were raised. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your work on your presentation. It was very much appreciated. And deep thanks to everybody who participated in our talk today. So are there any advertisements, any announcements on the side of SSK project team? Maybe yes, about the next lecture, yes?
No, we don't need advertising.
Okay, no advertisements, no announcements. Very nice. So then thank you very much. Thank you I deeply thank the SSK team for working with the technical side of today's presentation. So then I hope we will meet next time for the next SSK presentation. Thank you very much and see you again. See you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We leave the meeting now. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.